Well, are we all ready to go again, guys? No?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Sorry, hang on. Are we all ready to go again, guys?
Yes.
Yes, absolutely. Well, Brian, without further ado,
Thank you.
over to you.
Thank you, sir. So yeah, I showed you a little bit about how to create VMs and a little bit of background on our options to deploy things to the cloud, in this case Azure, but I also want to talk about container technology. So a little bit about some of the offerings we have. We actually have 3 different offerings that use containers on Azure. So the first thing I showed you actually when I created that coffee shop app was actually a container. So behind the scenes what it did is it created a container with Tomcat, Java, and a few other things and deployed that out to Azure, and that was running through a public IP address that I could show you. We also have other things. So we have basically Azure Container Service. Is it here? Did I put it out here? I don't think I did. Azure Container Service. So this is more, when you're creating containers, Docker or whatever, how do you actually orchestrate those and get them running on the cloud? Well, we have what we call Azure Container Services, which is a couple of things. It's a registry, so private registry, and the registry you use to take your containers and put them somewhere so you can actually deploy them later. So the Azure Container Registry is a private registry. How many people here have heard of the Docker Hub? Okay, a couple of you. So Docker Hub is where you go to get your Docker files, your Docker containers. Let's say you want to run a Tomcat app. You can go out to Docker Hub and get the latest Tomcat in a Docker container and then just use that as your base. Put your code on there and have that up and running pretty quickly. So that's one of the values of containers. So what we have is a private registry that allows you to create your own containers with all the code that you want to put on them already, and then have that deployed out to our Azure Container Service. And our Azure Container Service uses, it's a fully managed Kubernetes cluster. It also works with DCOS and Swarm. But it's just a quick and easy way to actually manage the orchestration of your container. So it's really simple to create one container, deploy that out, but how do you actually get 20 containers to all work together? And some of these containers can have different code on them, but how do you actually get them to communicate? How do you get them to scale? How do you get them to find each other? Well, this is what Azure Container Service does for you. Kubernetes, in this case, by default, allows you to orchestrate those containers, manage them, update them, shut them down, start them up, upgrade them, manage scaling, manage communication between the containers and things like that.
Hey, are you enjoying our video? Excellent. In 2006, we set out to get all the Java community to come together to talk about the language they love. The Dublin Java User Group was born. From humble beginnings with pub meetups, we now bring in Java rockstars and Java champions to Dublin every month. With the knowledge they share, these are the guys that want to help you enrich your working life. So sit back, listen in, and study those slides carefully. They are full of gems. By the end of this video, if you've learned something fabulous or have ignited just one great idea, go straight to your boss and demand a DubJug membership. Just imagine what it would be like for you to be networking and sharing great ideas with 40 other Java developers at our next event.
So that's what our Azure Container Service does. The other thing we have is Service Fabric. And Service Fabric goes a little bit beyond Container Service. It's a managed container service which allows you to basically focus on, if you've got a bunch of container images and they all preferably run microservices, we have sort of a sandboxed platform that you can put those containers on and have it run with automatic analytics and a bunch of other things as a service. So it goes a little bit beyond a managed container service. And then the simplest thing we have is single container apps. We have our web apps, which I showed you earlier. Web apps, they run on Windows or Linux, and I'll give you a little bit of example of those. So Service Fabric, as I mentioned, just it's useful. It's all a pre-made sort of sandbox for creating stateless and stateful microservices on Azure. And you can create this. You can deploy it on Azure. You can run it on Azure Stack, which is our cloud offering for on-prem. So if you want to start using cloud services similar to what we have on Azure, but you want to have complete control over the servers, we have Azure Stack, which runs locally and not on Azure. And then we have on-prem Service Fabric as well. So Azure App Service, I showed you a Windows app which ran that coffee shop. You can have web apps, mobile apps, logic apps, and API apps. They run on .NET, Java, Node, PHP, Python. Those are the things we have pre-configured. You can also go out to the Docker Hub and get these as well. They're auto-patching, auto-scale. So the idea here is you don't have to manage the operating system that these things run on top of. We will do that for you. So the Azure App Service on Linux, let me go into the portal quick and I'll show you what I'm talking about here. New. Okay, so we'll get rid of that. New, and then if I go into web and mobile, which is where our web apps are, we've got a web app, which is the one I showed you earlier. That was the coffee shop app. So it's a web app with the WAR file already deployed for Tomcat. So if I click on web app for containers, this is the new thing. So I'll call it dubjug. And by the way, you can do all this through the CLI as well. What happened here? What? There's a dubjug. Okay. Resource group. Interesting. So then if I say configure container here, there's 3 places I can get a container. So if I have one pre-made and it's on the Azure Container Registry, that's the one I mentioned earlier, you can get that. If I want to say Docker Hub, go out to so if I say Azure Container Registry, it's asked me for the name of my Azure Container Registry. I've already got a few created, but this is based on your subscription. And then you grab the image in one of those container registries. And there's a startup file in case you want to do anything special when it starts up. But then I click on Docker Hub here. I mentioned that, so I can create a Tomcat image. You see over here on the right, the checkbox says that this Tomcat image exists. If I want to create a Jetty. And what it's doing is it's actually going out to Docker Hub. Let's go out to Docker Hub. It's actually going out to Docker Hub and grabbing images for me. And this is something run by Docker, hub.docker.com. And I can do a search for Tomcat. So it's actually going out and getting that official Tomcat image when I tell it to grab Tomcat from Docker Hub. It's got 10 million plus pulls, so we know it's probably a pretty reliable build. But there's a whole bunch of other things here that are basically Tomcat. This guy has created something called Tomcat MySQL, which I'm guessing will be Tomcat and MySQL on the same app. And then the other thing is you don't have to use our Azure Container Registry. You can create your own private registry. As long as it's accessible via URL, you can go out and get it, and there's information here and to log into your own private registry to get that stuff as well. So it's 3 different ways you can create things, but if I say Docker Hub here, and I say Tomcat, what it's going to do is it's actually going to create an app service with Tomcat, and it's going to deploy it out to my Azure subscription. And basically that's a web app with a container already there. And as soon as that runs, it should fire up Tomcat, and I should be able to get into that Docker container and use, okay, go to resource, so it says deployment worked. And there's dubjug1. Now it should give me a Tomcat window here, hopefully. So it's pretty easy, and then you can drop your code onto this Tomcat server. So we'll come back to that in a bit. Sometimes it takes a few minutes to start up. So the idea is if I create this with a Tomcat image, I'll probably want to create my own private version of it with my own code on it. because the idea here is, yeah, it's immutable. You can kill it and then deploy it again. And that's where our Azure Container Service comes in handy, because it will upgrade. Let's say there's a new version of Tomcat that comes out and you want to upgrade to that version, it will automatically upgrade to the latest version of Tomcat for you on all your containers. It'll shut them down, it'll kill them, but it will actually put the new Tomcat. You control that through a Docker file. And so it'll just go out and get the latest version of Tomcat and update it that way. But let's see here. It's still not going. Okay. But anyway, so that's the idea here. So the idea, somebody told me this, actually at Java 1 I heard about this, where VMs are like pets, where you want to keep them and maintain them, and then the Docker files are like cattle, where it's okay to replace them a lot. So the idea here is you have to build and plan for replacement versus maintenance. So that's the whole idea, though, is you would have your own. That's why you have a private registry, and that's why they're so popular, is you would have your own containers with a private registry, and then what you would do is update that container with the new code or the new Tomcat server, and then just replace the old container. You don't have to actually go into the container and update it while it's running. You just shut it down, kill it, you go and get another one and put it in its place. So that's the idea.
So I guess there is an automated way of running your build, building the container, and refreshing what you have in the app service.
Yes, in the Azure Container Service. That's the idea behind that. Same with Service Fabric, although it goes in Service Fabric, it even goes beyond that, where you actually have code level control. So you can update your code. Let's say I have a new release of my code. Don't update the Tomcat server, but actually release my code onto all these containers. It will do that automatically for you. So, yeah.
I'm Catherine Askell, the founder of Guru Team. Guru Team specializes in delivering high-end ICT technical training and consultancy services. What makes us different is that we employ the creme de la creme of specialist instructors who have vast real-world experience and passion for the technologies they teach. With a continually evolving portfolio of over 250 courses, we can customize a program to suit your team. We have one of the largest portfolio of cloud, Linux and development courses in Ireland, and have several accreditations including the Linux Foundation, LPI and the DevOps Institute. We would be delighted to talk with you about working with your teams, so please visit our website on www.guruteamirl.com.
So that's a little bit about containers and the things you can do with them. Let's see if this thing ever came back. Nope, it's still running. Okay, it's taking a little while to run. Don't know what happened there. So the other thing is, the question is, okay, so you got the code out there, how do you actually enhance it? Well, we have a bunch of tools that we built to help you enhance your code that's already running, maybe on premise or on the cloud. And to do that, you can use our SDKs, our software development kits. And this SDKs, all of the services that we have, like Active Directory, storage, SQL, the MySQL service I showed you earlier, the Postgres service, they all have REST APIs. But the REST APIs can be hard to work with, so what we've done is build these software development kits, which gives you sample code and all kinds of facilities for managing these services that we already have available to you. So the idea here is you can get up and running really quick, no matter what language you're using our SDKs. And in this case, Java. We have a ton of SDKs that you can use for this. Storage, like blob storage. Key Vault is something for managing secrets. SQL database, self-explanatory. Data Lake is our Hadoop offering, but it's a really robust Hadoop offering. I think the minimum is 60 servers or something, with all kinds of analytics built in and things like that. Service Bus, Active Directory, Cosmos DB, which I'll show in a minute. So actually, let's just drill down into a couple of these apps. But first, I'll show you some other things we do. So we have toolkits. How many people here use Eclipse? Okay, quite a few. How about IntelliJ? Just a couple? That's what I thought. Okay, so most enterprises are running, as I'm sure you know, no surprise, most enterprises are running Windows desktops running Eclipse. So this is the typical application environment that we have. So let me show you that. Here's my Windows desktop running Eclipse. So what I've got here is a really simple web project in Eclipse. It's just got a couple of things here. Hello Dublin, let's change that. And I'll put Hello Dublin here. So basically what I'm doing is just simulating a small change. And then I want to deploy this out to the cloud. Okay, so how do I actually do that? So what we've done is we've created several plugins. These plugins manage Azure functions, which I'll explain what that is in a little bit. It's our serverless options. In this case, I'm just going to deploy out to a web app that I already created. The web app's already running out there. All I want to do is update my code and deploy it out there. But I can also deploy, let's go here. Once you install the plugins, you can go to Azure. You can configure application insights, which I'll talk about in a bit. I can add Docker support. I can publish this as a Docker container onto a VM, or I can publish this as a web app. So I'm actually just going to publish this as a web app. Now I already logged in here before you guys showed up and set up my subscription. So these are all the web apps I have on my subscription. I'm just going to choose this last one here. And if I say deploy, down here you see the green bar. As soon as it gets over to the right, which hopefully won't take too long, I can actually open that up. So it automatically, what it's doing right now is packaging up a container for me, a Docker container. It's running on a Windows web app, and it's actually going to deploy that Docker container out and replace whatever was there before. So as you were saying, immutable. So that's basically what it's doing. It's replacing the whole Docker container, which has got good and bad things. As you can see from here, it's a bad thing because this is a little tiny piece of code, and it takes a little while to deploy and then restart the service. So while that's going, I'll continue on. I'll get back to that.
We usually deploy through DFS or something else.
Yeah.
From a local machine, so it's
Yeah.
not a problem.
And it still takes a little while because it has to restart the server. I mean, it's the days of just, I've got just one line of code that's being changed. I can quickly change it. Unfortunately, that's one of the downsides. Now, the upside is, typically this is not the way you would deploy code. You don't have such a simple app. You would have something much more complicated with several different components, and those components could all go through a testing process or something before they actually get deployed. So that's the advantage of Docker, I guess, in a certain way, is it's good for realistic stuff. So I just showed you deploying to the app service. I'll get back to that and I'll show you how it worked later. Let's see, no, it's still deploying. As soon as it deploys, it'll give me one of these published links. So the next thing I want to show you, some of the services we were talking about. Cosmos DB is one of our big services. It's what we call a multi-model database. So what can you do with this? How many people work with MongoDB here? Nobody? Okay, one person. All right. So if you have a MongoDB app, perhaps it's not scaling well, perhaps you're having issues with it, you don't want to maintain it, you can use Cosmos DB. We have MongoDB capabilities on Cosmos DB. You set up a Cosmos DB account on Azure, and then you create a document DB, which is our MongoDB compatible service inside that account. And that's what it means by multi-model. I'll get into that in a sec. And then you just change the connection string from whatever you have in your current app to the Cosmos DB connection string that gets supplied to you in the account, and your application is running.
Jerry Nolan here from Stack & Co. When you want to change your job, you'll want to make a move which will give you career growth, interesting projects, and a fresh challenge. At Stack & Co, we can help you make that career enriching move by taking the time to really understand your individual interest and what represents the best next step for you. Let's have a confidential conversation to discover your career enriching move. Contact me on www.stackand.co.
So multi-model means we have key value pairs, we have documents, which is MongoDB compatible, column families, which is these tables. It's not full relational tables, it's just columns and rows of data, which are schema lists. You can still add items to the end of the record, and they're stored, I think they're stored in JSON, but they're easy to maintain. You can create and delete different data items in there without having to maintain a schema for the application. And for the APIs, we have MongoDB, table storage, Gremlin, Graph, and Spark, which is kind of cool. So the advantage of Cosmos DB is you have several different locations all over the world. Not only do you have the multi-model, which you can store all kinds of things in one account, but you also have this facility where you can actually replicate your data all over the world and access it from different access points with a reasonable amount of latency. So that's kind of a cool thing. It's all built in. So as soon as you take that connection string and change it from whatever VM you've got MongoDB running on into Cosmos DB, all of a sudden you have all this capability built in on the back end. So let's say right now you've got 3 continents that are using your data and you want to add a 4th continent. We probably have an endpoint for Cosmos DB near or in that continent that you can use right away. Cosmos DB, it has a SLA for availability, latency, throughput, and data consistency. So it's all managed for you, and the SLA is robust. We've used it for OneNote. Actually, Cosmos DB originally was used for Microsoft OneNote, which is our tool for storing data and storing sort of non-structured information. But now we have a lot of customers using it as well. Cosmos DB, so jet.com, which is how many people have heard of jet.com?
I work at
Okay. Oh, you do? Okay. Yeah, okay. Well, you guys are actually using Cosmos DB. Yeah, so it's 100 trillion Cosmos DB transactions per day, apparently. You know, they have, you know, so far so good. I hope this is true. You guys are very happy with it as single different digit performance. Yeah.
As far as I've seen, it's pretty good.
It's reliable.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Cool, good.
Hi there, John Bulger here from Version 1, an IT consulting firm that grew from 2 people back in 1996 to over 1,000 people today, with 100 Java developers alone. Core values is something that we take very seriously in Version 1 and is ingrained into every decision we make and into our culture. If core values and strong principles is something that interests you, then we would love to hear from you. You can find our website at www.version1.com. Enjoy the rest of the video.
So that's just one of the features, one of the services we have. So before I move on to functions, let me see if this actually deployed. Yes. So there you go. So now, when I go to Hello Dublin, so there you go. So Azure Websites, it updated the application. You know, I made that small change, and it deployed out. So it deployed out to my web app, and as you can see here, it got updated. So that's cool. And whenever things get published, so the idea here is we built tools into Eclipse for you to deploy things to containers and web apps. And you know, theoretically, it should be really easy. And if it's not, let me know, and we can work on ways to do this, you know, to improve it, basically. Okay, so Cosmos DB. The other thing we have that's sort of big news these days is Azure Functions. So how many people have heard of AWS Lambda functions as well? A few? Okay. So this is our answer to AWS Lambda functions. It's our serverless functions. So what would you actually use these for? Serverless code execution. We have all kinds of triggers that will actually trigger application activity. Now the cool thing about this is even though you're working with Java and we have a Java API, you don't necessarily have to have your code or your function triggered by Java. One of the examples I like to use is you can have a trigger like storage. So let's say a photo gets posted in Azure Storage. Azure Storage will actually trigger a function, and that function can generate a bunch of thumbnails for that picture, for that photo, and then put those into Azure Storage. So in this case, you'd have a trigger, which would be a new photo. You'd have an input binding, which is go out and grab the picture. Then you'd write a function here that says, give me thumbnails at 4 different sizes. And you'd execute that function whenever a new picture comes in. And then the output binding would be write those new thumbnails to storage. And there's several different things you can do with that. You can also integrate it with Jenkins and other things. So if you have a trigger in your function that something new comes into storage, let's say some code. So some code gets deployed out to Azure Storage, and we have a plugin for that through Jenkins, by the way. The code would actually trigger a process that would trigger another Jenkins process for deployment out to production or test or some regional application that you want to use. And we actually have analytics built in as well. So it's kind of cool stuff. The whole idea here is you have all these services that you can access through serverless functions, and the initial trigger can be written in Java, but the rest of it, you can have an application that runs in .NET, PHP, Python, Node, and they all use the same function, including Java. And the functions get called, they do certain things that interact with our Azure services, and then you get a response back. So that's the idea.
Hi there, it's Sergio Dobrovolsky here from Version 1, an IT consulting company that has a main focus on innovation. We believe that innovation is a key factor in being successful. That's why we created an innovation lab, a place where we can experiment, try new technologies, express ourselves, so in order to bring more value as possible to the company and to the community as well. If you're looking for new challenges and if you want to experiment the innovation with us, don't be shy and come and talk to us.
So just a little roundup of some of the services, the Azure services you can use when you're working with our SDK and with our Azure functions. It's a bit of an eye chart, but basically you can deploy to Kubernetes, Azure containers, Linux, Windows virtual machines, scale sets, etc., etc. And we also have those quick start templates I showed you, which are when I go into the marketplace and I look at Bitnami and stuff, there's Java 8, Tomcat, etc., etc. You can write to databases, MySQL, Postgres, Service Bus, Key Vault, Azure Active Directory, HD Insight, all kinds of things you can do to interact with our SDKs and our Azure functions as well. So, and then some of the other things we have. So we have DevOps tools, Chef, Puppet, all the major DevOps tools you're probably used to working with. We also have a tool called actually a service called Visual Studio Team Services, which is based on Team Foundation Server. And it's got a number of plugins for Java that work with VSTS to call Jenkins and a few other things. Jenkins itself, we actually have Azure Storage and Azure Container Service plugins. So you can deploy things from Jenkins to Azure Storage and Azure Container Service. And we also have distributed builds plugins. So if you have a master process that calls distributed processes in Jenkins, you can use Azure VMs as those distributed processes. You can create them through templates, and you can shut them down or put them to sleep when you're not using them, depending on what you want to do. But yeah, that's a little bit. Azure Cognitive Services is a big one as well. So we have this built-in service with all kind of REST APIs, and you can call those from Java and build applications using knowledge, machine learning, and applications. We have knowledge for actually doing machine learning, vision for analyzing photos and analyzing facial recognition, things like that, and several other things accessible through REST APIs. Some resources. I'll share these slides later, so I can give you the resources, but basically these are some resources that you can use to get started. There's a Dev Center, there's a Doc Center. We have some announcements through the Azure blog, and yeah, we have developer advocates too. In case you guys want to know, we have several developer advocates who are famous, much more famous than I am, who've joined our team recently to talk to open source communities as well. And that's it. I'm sort of going quick through these slides at the end here, and I'll take some questions.
I want to add something.
Yeah.
VSTS has a build system. You don't have to use Jenkins.
Yes.
And supports Linux build agents. So
Yes.
you can do everything there.
Yeah, it's actually pretty cool. So Visual Studio Team Services, the main selling point, I think, for people who aren't used to using it, who use Jenkins and things like that, is you get free free private Git repos. So if you want to have unlimited free private Git repos, GitHub will charge you for those. We have them free on Visual Studio Team Services. And the idea with VSTS, if you're not using it now, is if you have projects that maybe you have some .NET developers, some PHP developers, some Java developers all working on the same project, VSTS is a great tool for actually combining all those. You can delegate tasks, people can check in code, and depending, let's say the .NET code is dependent on some Java code, you can actually create dependencies, and when those are triggered, when those pieces of code are complete and the developer checks them in, it can trigger builds that generate both. Some can go to Jenkins, some can go to something else. But yeah, it's kind of a cool thing for managing huge projects or even small projects that use multiple languages and multiple product streams. So.
Hi, my name is George and I'm a Scrum Master at the Equifax R&D Centre here in Dublin. We focus on innovation and collaboration and have a fast-paced, team-driven environment where everyone is a key contributor to high-priority initiatives. We have a very healthy and vibrant agile development community where there is a focus on automation and CI/CD to ensure that the highest standards of quality are maintained. If you would like to learn more about us, please get in touch through our website, which is equifax.com.
So are you asking why would you use Azure versus AWS? Is that what you mean? No, it's a fair question. I mean, so the main thing is we have, AWS, Google, Amazon, they have teams of people who are managing their pricing to make sure it's compatible and competitive. And then, the other thing is there's also teams that are making sure that our performance and our offerings are at least equal to AWS. But the main thing is for us, I think, is service, that we provide a lot of service that maybe our competitors don't provide. You can actually talk to developers, you can talk to our developer teams. They can help you. I mean, they're not going to write the code for you, but they can help you find your way around. We have really good docs now, as I mentioned before, so they're all editable and you can issue pull requests and things. So we're a little more interactive. And our company is, Microsoft is a coding company from the ground up. I don't know does anybody know who Scott Guthrie is here? Okay. Scott Guthrie? Yeah, a couple of people. So Scott Guthrie is this, let me see, Scott Guthrie. Red Shirt Tour. Hopefully I'll get a result here. Yeah, so there we go. So the Red Shirt Dev Tour. So Scott Guthrie is in charge of 25,000 people at our company. He's the corporate vice president for the cloud, and he reports directly to the CEO of the company. And the reason why I'm telling you this is he actually just recently finished a 5-city tour. He went out and he actually stood in front of developers, 1,000 or so developers in each location in 5 cities, and live coded for 5 hours in front of them and gave them demos and stuff to show them how things work. And the reason why he told us he does this is it keeps him honest. He has to understand all these services at a very deep level, make sure they work, make sure that we're actually being delivered as promised, and he gets direct feedback from developers and stuff. So I don't know any other company that does that kind of thing. My point is that it's a code company from the ground up. I mean, he didn't have to do that, right? He manages 25,000 people. I'm sure he could have delegated things, but he didn't. He wanted to do it himself. And the reason why he wanted to do that was that he could understand firsthand what the challenges were of using our stuff, and also just what the customers are challenged with using our stuff as well. So, like I say, the reason why I'm telling you that is our company is a coding company, and we are really working with customers to make sure that whatever we are building meets their needs. And aside from that, our certifications, our locations, we have a lot of locations. But the main thing for me is that guys like Scott Guthrie, and by the way, it's such a huge example for the rest of us. You know, it's like, yeah, I managed 25,000 people, and I went out and did all this. What did you do this week? You know, sort of thing. It's a big problem for us sometimes to meet up to his expectations, but it's also a great example of the way that, you know, we'll work with customers and help people do things. If you work with some of the other companies, you know, their service might not be as good, and you might not have access to developers or you know, be able to provide feedback the way you can with Microsoft. So that's it. I guess that's basically it. I mean, you're not going to find a lot of big difference in price. And yes, we do have services that are faster or better or more powerful VMs, but that changes all the time. There's always some new feature that comes along that you know, that those guys will have that we don't have, but then we're going to have it eventually, and they might not have something for a while, but you know, it's sort of neck and neck all the time. But the really thing is, for me, is what sets us apart is our service and our people, and you know, the way we can help.
Equifax is a great place to work for, especially to develop your skill set as a developer. The company culture and the office atmosphere and the location are all perfect. A lot of our projects actually focus on big data and the cloud, so we use a lot of cutting edge technologies in our projects. So you'd see things like Java 9, Angular 2, AWS, Docker, and recently the ELK stack. You're constantly working on projects and products that are actively used every day, so that you know that your work actually means something. So if you'd like to learn more, get in touch and log on to equifax.com.
Yeah, there is actually. I'm glad you asked that, because you just reminded me. I have some free coupons here. These are good for $100 a month for 3 months. And on top of that, we just created Azure free trial. We actually just created a bunch of new free tier items. So even beyond the 3 months, when your $300 runs out, if I look in the FAQ here online, and I'm looking at this live because this changes all the time. 750 hours of general purpose virtual machines you get for 12 months. So when you sign up for a new account, you get all this stuff for free. This is a good one. This is forever. Well, theoretically forever. It could change, but for now, it's free in perpetuity. Always free, it says. So TED Web, where is it? Web, mobile, or API apps. So those app service apps I showed you, you can have 10 of those for free with 1 gigabyte of storage that you can use for anything. You can use it for WordPress applications, .NET websites, Java, Tomcat stuff, anything you want to use it for is free. And there's a whole bunch of these always free, and they're adding stuff here all the time. 50 virtual networks, 500 megabytes per day analysis with log analytics, you know. All kinds of things are actually built in and free. So there's a lot of free stuff you can use. But I'll give you these trial coupons as well. These are a little bit better than the standard offer, which is $200 for 1 month. This is $300 for 3 months. And then you get all this stuff that's always free too, so yeah. Any other questions? That's it. All right, well, thanks for coming at Halloween. And I guess thanks for coming. Well, the video will be posted. And, thank you.
Well, what did you think of that? I really hope that you enjoyed it. Just remember, if you want to become a member of the Dublin Java user group, all it costs is €75. €75 gets you the entry for 10 events. Doesn't have to be the next 10 events. It could be 10 events over 3 years, but it lasts for 10 events. It's superb value to see all these guys in Dublin